Last time we spoke about the First United Front and the formation of the Kuomintang. The Second Zhuli Fengtian War had just ended, as Feng Yusung betrayed Wu Peifu, turning the tide. Feng Yusung's Beijing coup saw him become a major player, and soon he reorganized his forces into the Kuomintang, promoting Chinese nationalism, social reforms, military modernization, and ethical governance. Despite his efforts, Feng Yusung's treachery left a lasting negative reputation. The new regime, with Duan Chide as chief executive, struggled with internal and external pressures. Feng Yusung's isolation led him to seek Soviet support, receiving significant military supplies. Meanwhile, the First United Front formed between the Kuomintang and the Chinese Communist Party, facilitated by the Soviet Union. Despite internal tensions, this alliance aimed to unify China. Sun Yat-sen's cautious cooperation with the Soviets was driven by pragmatic needs, even as ideological differences persisted, setting the stage for future conflict. This episode is The Rise of Chiang Kai-Shek. Welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Craig Watson. Yet before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia and so much more, so go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. Hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel over at YouTube. Over there I'm releasing a new series on the Japanese invasion of North China and Inner Mongolia. Also, please check out my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel, where for as little as $2 a month you get access to the exclusive Patreon podcast, early access to all of my content, and voting rights for what I will tackle next. Chiang Kai-shek was born on Halloween of October the 31st in 1887. He was born in Shiko, a small town in Fenghua of Zhejiang Province. Chiang Kai-shek was born to a Wuye family, a subgroup of Han Chinese who spoke Wu. His father was Chang Chaozong, and his mother, Wang Zaiyu. Both were members of a relatively well-off family of salt merchants. From an early age, Chiang Kai-shek was interested in the military. Like many youths at the turn of the century in China, Chiang Kai-shek cut off his coup, rebelling against the Qing dynasty. He began his military career at the Baoding Military Academy in 1906. After this, he traveled to Japan to the Tokyo Shinbu Gaiko Preparatory School for the Imperial Japanese Army. It was there he gained revolutionary fever, seeking to overthrow the Manchu back home. In 1908, he befriended Chen Jimei, who introduced him to the Tongmenghui. He graduated from the Tokyo Shinbu Gaiko, and then he served in the IGA for over 3 years. Upon hearing about the Wuchang Uprising, Chiang Kai-shek rushed back to China, where he would serve in the revolutionary forces over in Shanghai under Chen Jimei. Chiang Kai-shek then became a founding member of the Kuomintang. Chen Jimei was assassinated by agents of Yuan Shikai, leading Chiang Kai-shek to succeed him as leader of the KMT in Shanghai. In 1918, Chiang Kai-shek moved his base of operations to Guangzhou to join up with Dr. Sun Yat-sen. I have already told most of his story in previous episodes, but Chiang Kai-shek was there for all the ups and downs. During the conflict between Sun Yat-sen and Chen Jiongming, Chiang Kai-shek stood beside Sun. He even went into exile with him. Chiang Kai-shek protected Sun Yat-sen, and because of this, Sun Yat-sen began to trust him greatly. Sun Yat-sen regained control over Guangzhou in 1923 with the help of Unionese and CCP forces. Then, as we discussed in the last episode, Sun Yat-sen made the fateful decision to form the First United Front with the CCP to obtain Soviet support. Borodin had established the Whampoa Military Academy, and Chiang Kai-shek was given the job of managing it. Soviet advisors swarmed into Guangzhou alongside military equipment and regular pay for the soldiers. Whampoa was created to produce officers quickly, and its military education was a quite diluted form of the Japanese curricula used at the Baoding military academies. Of course, Chiang Kai-shek himself was a graduate of these, and he went to Japan to extend his military education. Thus, he brought a sort of bushido to Whampoa. He taught the boys about obeying orders without question, defending untenable positions to the last man, and attacking regardless of losses. The young officers became very much his own. Chiang Kai-shek also favored the idea of collective punishment for failure. Zhou Enlai, then already a prominent communist, became the chief political commissar of Whampoa, backed strongly by Borodin. Now, Sun Yat-sen's authority was confined to Guangzhou and central parts of Guangdong province. He, of course, had been strongly contested with, over all of this, by Chen Zhongming. This resulted in his northern expedition failing a few times. In the summer and autumn of 1924, he contended then with the Canton Merchants Association, who had formed an armed militia, and they began staging protests and strikes in August when Sun Yat-sen tried to cut off their arms suppliers. In October, the Merchants Association attempted to seize Guangzhou in a collusion with Chen Zhongming, and it was Chiang Kai-shek who personally led the Whampoa cadets to defeat and dissolve their militia. This was another moment for the rising star to show his worth. Then Sun Yat-sen was extended an invitation to Beijing from Feng Yusung, Duan Qirei, and Zhang Zuolin, the new triumvirate. All of them sought to reunify China. They wondered if this could be done peacefully. Sun Yat-sen had declined numerous times to come to Beijing and to rejoin the Bang government. In the past, he refused mostly because of Wu Peifu and Li Yuanheng. This time, he had less objections, and with Soviet backing, he finally had a better poker hand. Borodin thought it was a good idea, and now Chiang Kai-shek had a firm hand over the NRA forces. For once, Sun Yat-sen was not looking over his back to see if Chen Zhongming was going to seize Guangzhou. With Chiang Kai-shek watching over his military and his old friend Hu Hanmin as deputy over his civilian affairs, accompanied by those like Wang Jingwei, the Generalissimo said, well, why not? Thus, the Generalissimo went to Beijing. Now, just before he did so, he traveled to Tianjin, and over there he delivered a speech suggesting a national conference for the people of China. He called for an end to warlordism and the abolition of unequal treaties. He also received word from General Ma Fuxiang of the Ma clique, who notified him he was willing to join up with the KMT. Things were looking really good for the KMT at this point. However, Sun Yat-sen had a real problem. It was his health. While at Tianjin, he underwent an exploratory laparotomy. This is a surgical exploration of the abdominal organs. This was done at Peking Union Medical College Hospital. He had been suffering for a very long time from something related to his liver. Dr. Adrian Taylor opened him up and he stated, "The surgery revealed extensive involvement of liver by carcinoma." Dr. Taylor gave Sun Yat-sen only 10 days to live. Sun Yat-sen was hospitalized and he received radium treatment. February the 18th, against the advice of his doctors, he was transferred to the KMT HQ and he received traditional Chinese medicine. By March the 12th, Sun Yat-sen had died at the age of 58. The cause of his death was stated to be liver cancer. Sun Yat-sen left a rather famous will. It is generally believed that the will was written by Wang Jingwei on his behalf. For 40 years, I have devoted myself to the national revolution, with the goal of seeking freedom and equality for China. With 40 years of experience, I know that in order to achieve this goal, I must arouse the people and unite with the nations in the world, to treat us equally, to fight together. Now that the revolution has not yet succeeded, all my comrades must continue to work hard in accordance with my National Construction Strategy, National Construction Outline, 3 Democratic Principles, and Declaration of the First National Congress, to implement them. Recently, I have advocated the convening of a National Assembly and the abolition of unequal treaties, and we must promote their realization in the shortest possible time. This is what I have said. All of China watched eagerly to see who would succeed Sun Yat-sen. Wang Jingwei was at his deathbed and was entrusted to write his will out. Thus, most believed it was probably him who would be the prime candidate. Yet there were many other choices, and now the Soviets were also looking to see who would be the man they would have to deal with. A major situation then broke out in May of 1925. The triumvirate was not very popular amongst the Chinese people. Southerners particularly were not so keen about them. In the wake of Sun Yat-sen's death, the CCP thought that they had a major opportunity. A new bill was passed in Shanghai that would see the end of children under the age of 12 working in mills and factories. Now, as horrible as that does sound, children working in mills and factories, to be honest, many working-class families back then depended on such work to get by. Thus, it was a very unpopular bill. Alongside this, another bill was advocating for censorship of publications. It was about to be introduced, and it really pissed off the intellectual types. Strikes emerged, some aimed at Japanese-owned businesses, such as cotton mills. A group of Japanese managers were attacked leaving work. One was even killed. In response, Japanese foremen began carrying pistols on them while they were on duty. By May the 15th, a Japanese foreman shot dead a protester named Ku Chang-hung. The Shanghai population demanded a public funeral for Ku Chang-hung, and they began protesting. Many were arrested, and a trial was set for May the 30th. In response to this, a lot of students planned a demonstration. On the morning of the 30th, just as the trial was beginning, the Shanghai Municipal Police arrested some 15 student ringleaders at the Nanking Road in the International Settlement. The student protesters were taken to the Laojia police station. By 2:45 p.m., a huge crowd gathered outside of it. Demonstrators were demanding their release, and many entered the police station to do so. The police state the demonstrators tried to forcibly release the arrested, and the crowd could have been up to 2,000 people strong. There were only 12 cops at the time. Some were Sikhs, Chinese, there were even white officers. Allegedly, some chants were heard calling for killing the foreigners, and then violence erupted. The police commissioner at the scene, K.G. McKeown, shouted in Wu Chinese, "Stop! If you do not stop, I will shoot." At 3:37 p.m., shots were fired into the crowd. At least 4 demonstrators were killed. Another 5 would die later of their wounds, and 14 were hospitalized. The next day saw more students going around placing posters and demanding shops stop selling or buying foreign goods. Then their leaders came to the Chinese Chamber of Commerce with a list of demands. They sought punishment for those who had shot the demonstrators, and an end to the extraterritoriality rights of foreign powers in Shanghai, as well as the closure of the international settlement. The president of the Chamber of Commerce was away at the time, but his deputy agreed to the press for all of the demands to be carried out. Obviously, this was not going to actually happen, and the deputy would later go on to message the municipal council stating that he said what he said under duress. On June the 1st, martial law was declared. The Shanghai Volunteer Corps, a type of militia, was called up alongside foreign military assistance. Over the next month, together they raided demonstrators' houses and protected businesses. Countless strikes broke out, alongside demonstrations and violence. Shops were looted, those who refused the boycotts were beaten up, and perhaps 200 people died during all this mayhem. Had what become known as the May 13th incident broken out years prior, it would have amounted to pretty much nothing. Yet because of other events going on, it became a rallying cry for a sort of crusade. The incident galvanized other strikes, demonstrations, and boycotts across China. The main target of the public outrage moved from the Japanese to the British. Hong Kong and Guangzhou were deeply affected. Prominent Chinese citizens in Guangdong called for an anti-British strike. The KMT leaders and Soviet advisors considered the optics of the situation, some arguing that they should attack the Anglo-French settlement in Xiamen. The demonstrators began handing out anti-British leaflets in Hong Kong, and then a rumor emerged that the colonial government was planning to poison the colony's water supplies. Guangdong began offering free train passage to Hong Kong, greatly escalating the situation. Over 50,000 Chinese fled Hong Kong as a result of the chaos. Food prices skyrocketed, and the colony became something of a ghost town by July. By the end of July, nearly 250,000 people had left Guangdong. To try and prevent the colony's economic collapse, the British loaned £3 million. The 2 highest officials, Governor Sir Reginald Stubbs and Colonial Secretary Claude Severn, were quickly replaced, blamed for much of the crisis. For months, anti-British boycotts went on. Hong Kong's economy was paralyzed. Her trade fell by half, her shipping by 40%, and land renting by 60%. Similar situations arose in Guangzhou and Mukden. Feng Yusung, seeking to earn public favor, began anti-West campaigns, calling for a public apology from Britain. Jiang Zuolin hammered the Shanghai situation by funding the police to arrest protesters alongside many communists. Meanwhile, the situation in Beijing was tense. All were looking to see who would grab Sun Yat-sen's title. Hu Hanmin had succeeded Sun Yat-sen nominally in Guangzhou, but he was immediately challenged by the existence of Chen Jiangming over in Huizhou and the warlord Tang Qiao in Yunnan, who had just assumed the title of Deputy Grand Marshal. This was a title Tang Qiao had continuously refused to accept while Sun Yat-sen was alive. Chen Jiangming had strengthened his position in eastern Guangdong immediately after Sun Yat-sen's departure for Beijing. He colluded with Tang Qiao and the Guangxi warlords, Xu Men and Liu Qinhuan. They were planning yet again to attack Guangzhou. However, the Cantonese and Hunanese contingents of the NRA remained quite loyal. Chiang Kai-shek had the firm loyalty of the Whampoa graduates, whose first two classes had just graduated. All these forces combined, the KMT proceeded to conquer eastern Guangdong. A siege was erected against Huzhou, forcing Chen Jiangming to flee the scene. The success of all of this bolstered Chiang Kai-shek's reputation and solidified his leadership over the Whampoa graduates. Meanwhile, the new Guangxi clique warlords rallied around Li Zhongren, Bai Chengxu, and Huang Shaoxing, who seized control over Guangxi. Together they opposed the attempted comeback of the old Guangxi clique warlord, Lu Zhongqing. The Guangxi leader dumped Shen and fought Tang Qiao's attempt to install Liu Qinhuan as governor over Guangxi. By mid-July, Huang Shaoxing became the governor over Guangxi as Li Zhongren and Bai Chengxu brokered an alliance with the KMT. On July 1st of 1925, the KMT proclaimed a national government in Guangzhou, for what I would assume would be the 100th time now. A 16-member political committee chaired by Wang Jingwei emerged, with Liao Chongkai becoming the Minister of Finance, who was leading the left wing of the party. Xu Chengqi became the Minister of War, Hu Hanmin the Minister of Communications, who was also leading the right wing of the party. Despite the effort to balance the party out, to Westerners and conservative Chinese, the party seemed far too radical. Borodin was nicknamed the Emperor of Guangzhou by the press, and Zhou Enlai's position as Commissar of Whampoa was obscuring Chiang Kai-shek's efforts to turn the academy into his own personal instrument. A military reorganization accompanied the proclamation of the new government. The Whampoa graduates dominated the First Army, while Tan Yankai's 15,000 Hunanese became the Second Army, and Chu Beita's Yunanese became the Third Army. The Fourth Army was Cantonese forces led by Li Qishen, and the Fifth were Fujianese forces within Guangdong under Li Fulin. The Sixth Army of Hunanese forces under Chong Chen was formed in 1926, and later on a Seventh Army would also be formed, about 30,000 men strong, led by the new Guangxi clique. All of these units demonstrated quite a bit of loyalty to the KMT ideology, though their training varied greatly, and their autonomy from local warlords also varied. Liao Chongkai became the principal spokesman for Sun Yat-sen's policies, and for cooperation with the Soviets and the CCP. On August 20th of 1925, Liao Chongkai was on his way to a Kuomintang executive committee meeting in Guangzhou when suddenly 5 gunmen wielding Mauser C-96s gunned him down as he exited his limousine. Everyone in the KMT suspected Hu Hanmin, or possibly Xu Chongqi, had ordered the hit. In Liao Chongkai, Chiang Kai-shek had lost an old friend. Grief came upon him and hastened him to make critical decisions. He felt that the moment for dealing with plots and counterplots had finally arrived. The Central Executive Committee of the Kuomintang met with the state and military councils, and they decided emergency measures were in order. Wang Jingwei, Xu Chongqi, who was Chiang Kai-shek's commander-in-chief, and Chiang Kai-shek himself were given unlimited powers. 4 days after the assassination, Chiang Kai-shek unleashed a detachment of his Whampoa cadets in a search party. They broke into houses and offices of all the government officials, and they seized documents. Roughly 100 men were arrested. Hu Hanmin was taken under guard to Whampoa, and he was then sent on a diplomatic mission to Russia. There was no diplomatic mission. It was just exile. Now Wang Jingwei, Xu Chongqi, and Chiang Kai-shek remained to lead the government. Xu Chongqi had always been on good terms with Chiang Kai-shek, but now they were quarreling. Both men began arguing over the ongoing scuffle with Chen Jiangming. Xu insisted they should simply leave him alone, but it seemed old Chen Chongming had come back again to fight. Chiang Kai-shek strongly disagreed, and he began accusing him of conspiring with Chen Chongming, or at minimum, maybe some of his officers were. By the end of September, Xu simply departed for Shanghai, not wanting to take part in what was clearly becoming a power grab. With his prestige having suppressed the last Chen Chongming attack in October, Chiang Kai-shek began associating himself more and more with Sun Yat-sen's legacy. He did so by repeatedly calling for a northern expedition in public. Meanwhile, his contacts in Shanghai mediated some negotiations with Sun Quanfang. Sun Quanfang by this point was consolidating his rule over 5 provinces: Jiangsu, Zhejiang, Fujian, Guangxi, and Anhui. In November of 1925, the right-wing members of the KMT met in the presence of Sun Yat-sen's coffin near Beijing, where they were passing some resolutions calling for the end of the KMT-CCP alliance. After the assassination of Liao Chongkai, Wang Jingwei was pretty much unchallenged to become leader of the KMT's left wing. He declared the proposed resolutions null and void, calling for a counter-meeting in Guangzhou in January of 1926. Within the background of this, Chiang Kai-shek continued to call for a northern expedition. The KMT left, the CCP, and the Russian advisors advocated for a social revolution and to support efforts by strikers in Guangzhou. Chiang Kai-shek at this point was now the Guangzhou garrison commander and the inspector general of the National Revolutionary Army, aka the NRA, so he personally began preparations for a northern expedition. Yet his authority was being threatened by the growing CCP presence within the KMT army and navy. In February of 1926, Chiang Kai-shek approached Wang Jingwei on several occasions demanding he remove Russian advisors whom he was accusing of inciting mutiny amongst his subordinates. In March, a coalition of left-wing and Russian advisors led to the communist Li Jilong to become the commander of the Guangzhou Navy. Li Jilong began cracking down on the Navy's smuggling operations, and he replaced many ship captains with other communists. On the 18th, the fleet's flagship, the gunboat Zhongshan, departed without Chiang Kai-shek's knowledge nor approval from Guangzhou or Whampoa. It would turn out Li Jilong was moving the ship to support uprisings in the area, and this, of course, alarmed the KMT right wing. The Zhongshan relocated from Guangzhou to the anchorage off Changzhou, but sailed back the next day. When prompted to what he was doing, Li Jilong stated he had moved the ship under direct orders from Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek, upon hearing this, became gravely alarmed because he had never given such orders. Then Chiang Kai-shek began receiving a lot of bizarre phone calls. Chen Jiru, the second wife to Chiang Kai-shek, reported Wang Jingwei's wife, Chen Bijun, had just called her about 5 times on the 18th, checking Chiang Kai-shek's schedule, things like where was he at given times. Likewise, the Whampoa political director, Dong Yanda, began calling asking when would be the next time Chiang Kai-shek would be sailing for Changzhou. Chiang Kai-shek simply told Dong Yanda, not anytime soon. Then Li Jilong called Chiang Kai-shek personally, reporting that Dong Yanda had just ordered him to depart. Later in his official memoirs, Chiang Kai-shek would assert it was Wang Jingwei who was calling everybody. Chiang Kai-shek responded to the situation by purchasing a ticket secretly aboard a Japanese steamer, and he headed to Shantou. He believed something was afoot, perhaps a putsch or some kind of assassination attempt. Later on, Chiang Kai-shek stated it was all a ploy to kidnap him and exile him to Vladivostok. While his explanation was not very credible, his fear was genuine. It was an extremely volatile time in Guangzhou, and plots by the left or right wings were expected. Andrei Buvnov, head of the Soviet advisor's mission to Guangzhou, would later note in his report the supposed incident was due to an aborted putsch enacted by CCP members. On March 20th, Chiang Kai-shek ordered the Zhongshan to come back to Guangzhou, and she did, mooring in front of the officers' club with her crew apparently at general quarters. At 4 a.m. on the 21st, Chiang Kai-shek declared martial law, and he began arresting all known communists holding positions of authority. Li Jilong was arrested from his bedroom, his warship was secured as Jiang Dingwen assumed his place at the Navy Bureau. Then Wu Tietjiang and Hui Dongsheng surrounded the residence of Wang Jingwei and the Soviet advisors, placing them all under house arrest. Dong Yanda was arrested, the Hong Kong Strike Committee saw a crackdown, and Liu Ju arrested many communists of the 2nd Division and those at Whampoa in the First Corps, such as Zhou Enlai. Chiang Kai-shek's loyal men disarmed the Communist Paramilitary Workers' Guard. 2 entire garrisons were dissolved. Borodin and Vasily Blucher were both arrested. All those arrested were removed from their positions and they departed Guangzhou. Chiang Kai-shek carefully explained to the public that his actions were taken specifically against uncooperative individuals and that he was not simply targeting communists. But yeah, he was just targeting communists. When Chiang Kai-shek and Wang Jingwei were left, the last two, with unlimited power, they simply went against each other. Wang Jingwei certainly did not approve of the mass arrest of communists. Apparently, Wang Jingwei threatened Chiang Kai-shek, telling him to leave Guangzhou at some point. Wang Jingwei apparently was trying to scare him off by suggesting he leave, but Chiang Kai-shek did not do so. Suddenly, Wang Jingwei became quite sick. Apparently, he had a high fever. He was visited by Chen Gongbo, Tan Yangkai, Li Jichen, Zhi Beide, and TV Song, the current finance minister. Apparently, Wang Jingwei was pretty pissed off, complaining to them all about how Chiang Kai-shek had gone over the top. A Nationalist Executive Committee was convened on the 22nd, and a compromise was established. Wang Jingwei would take a vacation to France. In reality, of course, Wang Jingwei had simply lost this quasi-Game of Thrones. Wang Jingwei had more than likely tried some crooked attempts to kill or get rid of Chiang Kai-shek. He failed, and Chiang Kai-shek responded firmly, by probably threatening to kill him. Wang Jingwei had felt it prudent he simply retire in the end, so he departed 5 days after the chaos had ensued. Once he had reached a safe location, he wrote to Chiang Kai-shek that henceforth he was eschewing all political activity. Basically, it's a please don't kill me moment. Thus, Chiang Kai-shek emerged the sole survivor of the original 3 successors to Dr. Sun Yat-sen. All of this became known as the Guangzhou coup, or the Canton coup, and what exactly happened is kind of sort of a mystery. It's a lot of he said, she said kind of stuff. The end of the coup effectively stopped the CCP and Soviets from trying to undermine the KMT from the time being. Despite the quasi-war between the two sides, an awkward balance emerged. Chiang Kai-shek needed Moscow's help for the Northern Expedition. The CCP and Soviets needed the KMT to help them grow. Chiang Kai-shek took a delicate touch henceforth, making conciliatory moves. Chiang Kai-shek met with Borodin, and they had what was described by Chiang Kai-shek as a calm and friendly conversation. Almost immediately after the incident, Chiang Kai-shek began criticizing the extremely anti-communist members of the party. He became a kind of chief of police between the communists and the anti-communists. But this was all a charade. In a political sense, Chiang Kai-shek emerged extremely right-wing. He believed something had to be done to curb the communist influence in the KMT. Thus, in a rather fiery speech, he began demanding the communists stop attacking Sun Yat-sen's 3 principles. Basically, this entire time, the communists were trying to take Sun Yat-sen's 3 principles and change them towards more of a class struggle theme. No communist could admit to doing such a thing. It was rather blasphemous at this point, though they were doing it, like I said. So it was a safe way to try and keep the communists in check. Chiang Kai-shek followed this up by stating no communist should hold high office in the Kuomintang, and the communists begrudgingly had to abide by this. Chiang Kai-shek then, during a Central Executive Committee meeting, suggested that all the communists should simply be expelled from the Kuomintang, but the committee voted that one down. However, there was an agreement that relations between the two groups needed to be revised, and more importantly, the communists were to hand over a list of all of their members to the Kuomintang. To all of these things said, Borodin listened and he never said a word in disagreement. It seemed Chiang Kai-shek and Borodin had made a promise to each other to get along, at least until the Northern Expedition was successfully carried out. Chiang Kai-shek had reached an agreement with Moscow. The Soviets would maintain their financial and arming of the KMT if some Soviet advisors were kept on. They also agreed to get the CCP to hand over a list of all of their members in the KMT, and that no communist would ever try to hold top cabinet positions. On April the 3rd, Chiang Kai-shek cabled an official public telegram stating the entire incident was, quote, was a limited and individual matter of a small number of members of our party who had carried out anti-revolutionary plots. Chiang Kai-shek removed some right-wingers from leadership, such as Wu-tier-chung, forbade right-wing demonstrations, and no one was ever to publicly question the First United Front again. It seemed this was done to appease the Soviets. While Joseph Stalin strongly backed the alliance, those like Trotsky really opposed it. Chiang Kai-shek was formally handed leadership of the party and the army, ending civilian oversight over the NRA. Soon, some emergency decrees would be levied to expand Chiang Kai-shek's power. Chiang Kai-shek had become the new Generalissimo. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. Hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel over at YouTube. Over there, I'm now releasing a new series on the Japanese invasion of North China and Inner Mongolia. Also, please check out my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwar channel, where for as little as $2 a month, you get access to the exclusive Patreon podcast, early access to all of my content, and voting rights for what I will tackle next. There's actually a current poll ongoing, and it seems a new episode will be done on the devastating loss of Force Z, that being the sinking of the Prince of Wales and the Repulse. The First United Front nearly collapsed as a result of a real Game of Thrones being played out after the death of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the father of the nation. In the face of many rivals, it was the dark horse, Chiang Kai-shek, who came out on top. He would consolidate the strength of the South and soon march north to take Beijing.